now that we got all the housekeeping out of the way, we got a bunch of fun stuff to talk about today. But let me introduce myself. So I'm Tom Willerer. I'm COO at Reforge. I've been at Reforge for about 4 months now, somewhere in that ballpark. And prior to this, I was Chief Product Officer at Opendoor. Prior to that, I was Chief Product Officer at Coursera. Both Opendoor and Coursera, I joined pre-public and helped establish many of the practices that we put into place for product. At Coursera, I joined when we were less than 50 people and doing $1 million in revenue, and helped us scale into 100 million in revenue. So very, very fun time to have been there. And I was VP of product before all that at Netflix. When I was at Netflix, we were shipping those round circular discs called DVDs. If anyone's ever heard of those, you put them into a device and it played a movie, mostly TV shows as well. And we had transitioned during that time period to streaming, and it's a pretty wild time. And a lot of the things that I've learned about how to run product reviews honestly comes from and is inspired from my time at Netflix. So that's me. And diving right in, when I was doing some research on this topic, we talked to a bunch of Reforge members, and this quote stuck out both as like emblematic and very poignant for this topic, which is from a director level product leader who's also a Reforge member. It said, "I've never received any guidance about how to run a product review. It's always been a learn as you go, try and fail, and watch and learn experience." And I think the reason I ended up writing about this, it's like very process driven, but it's because of exactly this point. There's been no writing on this topic whatsoever. So I think it's really important to put out some best practices on that, and that's what I'm hoping to do today. I published an artifact on this, and the artifact can be found on Reforge. It's called Product Review Process at Opendoor. I would have said Product Review Process at Opendoor, inspired by what I learned at Coursera and Netflix, would have been the complete title. It's just like too wordy. So it's Product Review Process at Opendoor. But I've been refining this basically at every company I've been at to try to make it better and better and better. This document itself, if you're not familiar with artifacts, we've got over 600 of these. They're the actual work product that people are using in their jobs. And what we do in these is we put it out there. So it's kind of like GitHub for non-code. And then we give some context. So there's videos of me and text of me explaining why I made certain choices on this. But the focus of that document is really around this framing of the acronym of FRAME. And I'm going to walk through each of these components so that we have a good sense of how to think about product reviews. I want to talk about what we should focus the discussion on, the rules of engagement, how should we behave, and like everyone has a different role. It's not homogenous. Everyone acts the same. Different roles should behave in a different way. Who should attend? And what role should they take on? What form should this review take? I have an opinion on that. And then the events, like what should the cadence of this be? So let's walk through each of those in turn. With the first one, I think probably one of the more important ones around what's the focus. And I like to focus these product reviews on the customer problems to be solved. And part of the reason for that is we're all working inside of a company, and we end up talking to our colleagues most of the time. And because of that, most of what we are talking about is related to some internal process. Oh, how do we do this? Oh, these metrics don't look great. Whatever it is, it's always about some business process. And because of that, we end up forgetting about our customers more so than we really should. So to me, the purpose of the product review is really about grounding it in, I am planning to release this feature or this product because it is helping to address this customer problem. And here's the evidence that I have that that's the case. So that's kind of thing one. Thing two is really having a hypothesis. And I link here to just like a definition of how to think about, building out hypotheses. And I think this is so important because it's easy to get lost in what we're trying to do. And it's easy to not state your conviction ahead of time. And then after you've done it, after you've run the experiment, after you've shipped the product, to justify that it worked, even though that the way it worked wasn't what you thought it was going to do ahead of time. And that's really easy to do because you've just spent all this time and effort shipping the thing. So in this model, what we're trying to do is get really clear. If I ship this feature or this product, I think it will have this impact on these users. And here's how I plan to measure that. So that after the fact, we can say, did we actually prove this hypothesis true or false? And I'm not inventing something new here. This is the scientific method. So I'm just proposing that we try to use that as much as possible as a philosophy for how we actually ship product. The third piece that I think is really important here is the strategic alignment and differentiation. So we've defined the customer problem to be solved. We've stated in a hypothesis that is measurable in some way. Not everything's going to be an A/B test. I'm not expecting that, but we have some idea of how we're going to be able to tell if something was successful or not successful. Now it's time to think through, well, how does this fit into the strategy of what we are trying to do as a company? How is this differentiated from what already exists on the market? If I'm including sharing features, it's like, is this just a table stakes type of feature? This isn't really about differentiating us. Everyone has sharing features, but it's really important because we're trying to establish some growth loops. Like, what's the strategy and how is this differentiated versus I'm introducing a whole new capability. And we did this at Opendoor. We introduced the ability for people to use our cash to buy their homes instead of for us buying their homes. Entirely new capability, basically a new product, highly differentiated in the market. But because of that, we had to start small, learn if this was working, and build up over time. In the first few iterations of it, we didn't expect it to be done and perfect. So being clear about that strategic alignment and differentiation is very important. Fourth piece here is the phase that the project is in. So this can often get overlooked. Are you actually just starting to think about a project? Is it mostly brainstorm mode? Has it shipped? Do you have data on it? And now you're looking to figure out what we should do. Should we scale it? Should we drop it? Should we continue to iterate before we scale it? Which phase of the project is this in is important to call out because it helps ground the meeting in the type of feedback that will be most useful. And then the last piece here I already mentioned in the hypothesis section is just what are the key success metrics? Defining this up front allows us to be very clear about what we're trying to solve and also not trick ourselves after it's done to say, oh, well, it worked. Well, how do you know it worked? Well, because this one random metric went up. Well, was that actually something you wanted to have happen? And if the answer is no, then you should think pretty hard about whether that actually constitutes success. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Rules of engagement. And there are a number of rules here that I think are really interesting. And I'm going to break them down into 4 different personas. One as an exec. This is a role I've been playing more recently. And what I have tried to reinforce in this is that I am not the decision maker. So this is maybe a controversial statement, but I don't look at product reviews as a place primarily to make decisions. I look at the product review as a place to gather feedback and to help product managers see around a corner, or whoever is running the product review. Might be a designer, might be an engineer, might be a product manager, might be a product marketer. Whoever it is that is running that meeting, their goal for the meeting is help me not make a mistake. Help me make sure that what I'm doing is actually a good thing to do. And help me think through the edges of this in ways that I didn't think through already. So what's important is, as an exec, to recognize that you are not the decision maker, to state that out loud in the meeting. I am not the decision maker. Whoever's meeting this is the decision maker. And then as an exec, you can turn yourself into a feedback giver and make it very clear. Hey, I feel very strongly about this feedback, or I don't have a lot of conviction in this, but something I would consider is XYZ. So being very clear about all those pieces as a cross-functional partner. So let's say you're in the room and you're not part of the core team. Your job is to debate. Go in there and help them think through, like, why might this not work? Think through all of the edge cases here. You just get in the arena and go debate. As a core team member, you've spent a lot of time on this already. So you've already had probably multiple meetings with the core team to figure out if this is the thing that you think that we should be doing, and the team feels reasonably good about it. So this meeting isn't about you expressing your opinion per se. This meeting is about you helping whoever is leading that meeting ask clarifying questions and really get to, the real nuggets of insight that are interesting that are coming out of this meeting. And then as a product manager, or I should say differently, I'm kind of assuming the product manager is always the leader of this meeting. For the leader of the meeting, it's to drive the discussion. Go in with an agenda. Go in where I've seen these go off the rails are when whoever is leading the meeting just kind of lets the meeting evolve. And it turns into a potpourri of feedback, and you kind of don't know what to do with it. So what's really helpful is the leader of the meeting, in this case, I'm calling that the product manager, drives the discussion. They go in with goals for the meeting. They go in with certain things they'd like to discuss, and they're shutting parts of the discussion down and keeping it moving. And that's a real art to be able to learn that. But, if something's going off for a little bit, you go, that's really interesting. Let's table that. I've got that written down. I've noted it, but I want to keep the discussion moving. And I want to talk about XYZ. That's really the goal. Your goal is, like, selfishly, you're out there, you've got a thesis and you're defending it. And you're trying to get a bunch of ideas that'll sharpen it and make it better. And that's the goal. So this is how I think about that meeting and the rules for engagement. Hopefully that's very clarifying for everyone. The next piece is who should attend this meeting. And I think this is a very interesting and good thing to think about. The attendees, first point here is that keep the decision-making out of product reviews. I mentioned this in the last slide, but I'll reinforce it again because I think it's different enough. And sometimes we try to get all the key decision makers in a room that we walk out of this meeting with a decision. And why do I not think that that's the best solution? Because, well, Tom, isn't it obvious that that's more efficient? Like, isn't it better to just get everyone in the room and make the decision and kind of move on from there? And, like, in one case, yeah, it is. But what I'm trying to reinforce with these meetings is really a culture where the execs or the leaders are not always the decision makers, in that the teams are empowered to make autonomous decisions. And because of that, what we want to do at these meetings is not make them a decision-making meeting, because execs will want to try to do that naturally. Yes, let's do this. No, let's not do that, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, the team will probably want to do that somewhat naturally too. Let's just go get approval. And I think that's almost a cop-out both ways. If I'm on the team, if I'm a leader of a project, I want to do it because I have conviction that this is the right thing to do, not because someone told me to do it. And that's really, really important and really, really hard, building that conviction. And I use these meetings as a feedback mechanism and to test. As an exec, I use these meetings as a feedback mechanism for me to get into the details, for me to provide my perspective, but also as a test of whether or not the leader of the meeting, the product manager, whoever it is, has enough conviction in what they're trying to do. Have they thought through this at sufficient enough detail to really be able to defend it against, a bunch of smart people giving smart feedback? And that is hopefully the way that these meetings should go down. And because of that, you can keep the decision making out of it, because by and large, I'm assuming that the team is autonomous to make those decisions. And then I just want to be able to give my input. So the other piece is, after these meetings, it's really important to ensure that whoever is leading the meeting share their memos, takeaways, and next steps. It shouldn't be that what happens in a product review stays in a product review. The discussion doesn't have to include everyone. To the last point here, keep the meeting attendance to the folks that are critical to the meeting or project success, because you want a discussion. If you have 50 people in there, it's not a discussion. If you have 50 people for an hour, basically everyone gets 1 minute of speaking time. That you can't really get much across. There's not a meeting there. So you want it to be just the relevant people to make the project a success. But because of that, one major complaint I hear is, well, I need to be in that meeting because I need to know what's going on. And I think the way to overcome that is just share out the memo, notes, and takeaway with as many people as want to see it. That one, I'm like, be liberal in sharing that one. Whereas with the meeting, keep it tight. And I think that really helps. So I think that helps in a number of ways. You can keep the meeting tight by sharing more liberally what happened in the meeting and the takeaways from it after the meeting. And it keeps the discussion much stronger by having a smaller meeting. And it creates some discipline that the meeting actually mattered. It wasn't just a random, 45-minute meeting that no one did anything with. Like, there is a follow through here. So there's a number of reasons why I think this is an effective approach, but that's the piece on attendance. On the memo, so this is really inspired by Netflix, and for a very long time, we were presentation driven. And I'll say Netflix was really inspired by Amazon, but for a very long time, Netflix was presentation driven. And every meeting was a deck. Create a deck, create a presentation. In that presentation, we share all of the relevant insights, and we kind of wholesale swapped at one point to everything being a memo. And these memos can get out of hand. So I'm not suggesting that the memo is like a 10-page memo and cover everything, but imagine you can have like a 1 to 3 page memo that's covering the things that I mentioned earlier in this presentation: customer problem, hypotheses, what's your strategic differentiation, how are you going to measure success? Those are the key pieces. And the reason a memo works, I think, better in most cases, I'll come to a caveat there, in most cases than a presentation, is because you actually have to write a full thought. I mean, all of these bullets are not full thoughts. These bullets are meant for when you have a large group of people and you're mostly elaborating on the short points here through what I'm saying and the discussion that comes out from it. Versus a memo where you actually have to develop your full thesis and thoughts, which is honestly a lot more work than creating a quick presentation. And I think that work is worth it, because the clarity of thinking that comes out in written memos versus a presentation, in my opinion and from my experience, is much, much greater. And this wasn't something that I invented. This wasn't something that Netflix invented. It's just something that we adopted at Netflix and I've really come to like, and it's because Amazon did this. And Amazon had a whole certain way of doing their memos that I think is interesting. And I'm not suggesting it definitely has to be that way. The other things that I'd like to do is have a 15-minute read or pre-read. Either people pre-read it before getting to the room, which can be tricky. So instead, I just reserve first 10, 15 minutes of a meeting where people can kind of go through, read it, look at other people's comments in the docs. The other thing great about docs, you put all these comments in there. It's very collaborative already. Then you've got a 45-minute time period to discuss. And the discussion is richer because people didn't come in not seeing anything. And then, they come in a little hotter on the topic, which is also harder to do on a presentation because often presentations are half thoughts and images, and you just don't get the same context if you read it asynchronously. It has to be done synchronously. Now, I think there are topics where a presentation is better. One specific one would be when it's more visual and you need to walk someone through a flow. I think there are reasons why that might be easier. Now, I'll also say at Reforge, we've adopted a Loom culture where we'll kind of walk someone through, like you can imagine this being done through a Loom. I record myself walking through these slides and having this conversation, and then everyone gets to see it async. And then with Loom, you can go comment in there. You can react and, you know, in line. So I think that's another option is you could have a memo with a Loom video where you're really walking through the UI, and that might accomplish the same thing. So some thoughts on how to format that. Last piece here is really around the cadence of these meetings. And I think this is important because I've tried a few different methods here. When I first started at Coursera, I instituted product reviews, and I had like 4 hours blocked on Thursday for product reviews. And I picked Thursday because, you know, it's not Friday. Friday is a bad day for this. And, you know, you get some prep time Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So Thursday just felt like a natural day. I think it's like, basically you want to avoid Monday and Friday would be my take, because Monday, the prep's like all on the weekend. So probably Wednesday, Thursday are really good days for these types of meetings. And the cadence, so I blocked time, and it was ad hoc. So we would send out a note to the product leaders and say, anyone have topics for the week? And some people would say yes, and some people would say no. And people didn't know when should I present and when should I not present. And it just was like very, very hard to manage. And there was no cadence and no rhythm to it at all. So I switched it. And I then just broke it into chunks. I said, okay, we've got a growth team. You get this 30-minute slot. We've got a core experience team. You get this slot. We've got a supply oriented team. You get this slot. You know, I broke it down by the pods or the team structure, gave them each a dedicated time. And the expectation was they were doing this, if not weekly, at least 2 times a month. So there were times when a team would say, we don't have a topic this week, we're canceling our session. But it was them canceling their dedicated session versus them just not opting into a generic session. And that worked way, 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 way better. I've done that same way in all the other companies that I've worked at as well. So I think you have to kind of force some cadence. I think one way to do that is just give people a dedicated slot for this. And it's okay if they cancel, like don't force the meeting, but you should expect these are probably happening. If you're shipping on any reasonable cadence, you should expect that these are happening at, you know, probably at least twice a month. And during like heavier times, there might be more of these happening more frequently. Okay. So before we get to some FAQs, which will launch us into questions, I wanted to talk about and just touch on some of the failure modes of bad product reviews, because I think these are probably pretty common. First one being too much feedback. And the question would be like, why does this happen? Because we've all experienced this, where you're like, I did not need all of that feedback. I wasn't actually asking for it. And you just continually get feedback from people. And it's like, you wrote a doc and you got 1,000 comments. And do I need to respond to all of these comments? And now you've got all these people that are asking questions. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's a full-time job just to, you know, basically respond to these comments and like run a product review. So I think this happens a lot of times because people are responding to overly broad questions, or people may think they're decision makers or want to be a decision maker and to be more involved in the decision. So being very clear about the type of feedback you're looking for and who the decider is very important. You can also ask people to adopt some frameworks in how they give feedback. You know, it's like, give your level of conviction in the idea. Okay, if you're giving me a comment, how much do you believe in it? A lot, a little, somewhat? I'm just speculating, because otherwise it just helps you sift through it and categorize it yourself. So those are some ideas there. Another would be like too little feedback. And some of it, reasons why that happens, like attendees might lack enough context, or they already agree with everything you're saying, or they don't agree with everything you're saying. They're just not sure how to state that. Like they're a little sheepish and not sure if they're going to offend you. And I think what you can do instead there is like, if you're not getting enough feedback, maybe the topic just should be covered async. Send it out, doesn't need to be a meeting. It's pretty non-controversial. Don't make a big thing of it, just move on. If you're, if people, that's like the case where everyone agrees, or it's just like such a minor thing, just move it along. If it's controversial and you're not getting a lot of feedback, I think you need to go fishing for it. You need to like pull that out. Hey, I know some people might disagree. It's okay. I'm early enough on. I want to expand my thinking. Tell me why. And like encourage people to do that. But they're worried that they might offend you. So by you saying you want that feedback, it helps them feel comfortable and safe to be able to go ahead and give that to you. You might get too late of feedback, and people just don't really, they give like general opinions that aren't really useful. The meeting can also go off the rails and open up new issues that are out of the scope for the product review. So just upfront clarify what you're trying to do, what kind of conversation you want to have, and what kind of feedback you want to get. There's like didn't ask for the feedback, or rambling, meandering discussions like that. That happens a ton, and the way to do that is just cut it off. Sometimes you have to be okay being a little bit uncomfortable. Hey, really interesting. I think we've talked about that enough. I want to keep the meeting moving along. If you don't do that, like you could say, okay, I don't want to do that because then I'm going to make that person feel uncomfortable. But like you're kind of sacrificing all the other attendees to the meeting just for that one person. So I think it's really important to be able to have that kind of skill. This is like a moderation skill. If you've ever done qualitative research, the research is in the glass. Do that really well, because you'll get a lot of meandering. And it's like, interesting point. Thank you for saying that. I noted that. We got to keep moving along. There's some arguing and not debating that happens. And it's really like when participants don't feel like they're heard. I keep coming back to the same point over and over and over again, and it feels like I'm arguing. And why? Because it's like, I just don't feel like you heard me. So I think it's just like acknowledging, I hear you, I wrote it down, some of the same practices. People, you as the meeting leader can oversell your point of view. You're really trying to get approval instead of solicit debate. I don't think that that's a good way to have these meetings. I think you should come into them intellectually curious and honest. This is what I think. This is why I think it. I have high conviction in it, but I'm open to be convinced otherwise. And I want to be shown that there's other perspectives here. And then we touched on needing the answers and what happens in the product review stays in the product review. So I won't belabor those, but on the last one of what happens in product review stays in product review, it's the same thing I mentioned before. After the meeting is over, it's really important for the leader of the meeting and the team to just synthesize what they heard and what they're planning to do, so that everyone in the meeting feels like that was a valuable use of my time and I understand what's happening still. Okay. As we transition into questions, I wrote down some of the frequently asked questions, and any of the ones that I didn't get to, I'll just kind of address right now. We touched on the first one. Why is it better to not make decisions in a product review? How can I assess if my product reviews are effective? This one's simple. They're for you. They're for the leader of the meeting. If you're finding that they're helpful, then they're successful. If you're finding that they're mostly overhead and mostly theater, then you should do something totally different. That's a waste of your time and everyone else's time. Should product reviews change for 0 to 1 work versus feature development? I've been asked this question a bunch. Probably, but I still think it's worthwhile to get feedback on your projects, and that's really what these are about. So for 0 to 1 work, the temptation will be everyone wants to be involved. It's like this new shiny object that everyone needs to be involved in. So you're gonna need to limit who's actually in these meetings. And then I would imagine they should happen much more frequently because things are changing quickly. But it's a super small group of people that are high judgment that you trust. On the feature development, many of these will be things that not every single one of them needs a full-on product review, because strategy is pretty well known, the customer problem is pretty well known, that you can just kind of lump a few together. So that might be a few of the differences. What do I do if my product review is going poorly? Great question. And I think you got to use some of the tactics that I mentioned before. Like, what are all of the reasons why it could go off the rails? If it's like meandering discussion, call it out. Hey, I think we're meandering a little bit. I'm going to bring us back to the agenda. Here's what I want to get out of this meeting. I think really the more that you have a sense of what you're looking to get out of the meeting, the less likely these meetings are going to go poorly. Okay. We've gotten through the material that I prepared, and I would love to hear any questions that people have.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. We have a few in the Q&A segment, and I'll read them out in order of number of upvotes. So the first question is, what is the outcome of the product review process? AKA, what is the question we are trying to answer?
I think the outcome of the product review process is we ship higher quality products and we solve our customers' problems better than we would have without this process. That's it. You know, it's pretty simple. So what the leader of the meeting is trying to answer is, am I solving the right customer problem? Is my hypothesis correct? Am I thinking about this feature, this test, this product correctly? And you go into it thinking that you are. Like, why go into it thinking that you're not? You've like gone through the work to develop the conviction, but then you have this moment where you're like defending your thesis. You're going to get smart people in a room that also understand it, and those people, you're going to ask them to poke holes, basically. And that might not change your mind, but you are better off for understanding all of the objections and going, yeah, I hear that. I don't think that's right. And here's why. But I'm going to still keep going forward with what I think.
Awesome. The next question is from Joanna. They ask, do you think it's possible to hold an effective product review asynchronously?
I think you have to use, So, okay, let's say you were going to do this asynchronously. Can you do it? Absolutely. Is it as effective? I'm not sure. I haven't done this enough to know, but if I were going to try to spitball how we would run something like that, I'd definitely have a pretty good memo that's written up. I'd ask for people to, have like a open comment time period from this day to this day. I will be collecting comments, and then like, great, those are all in there. Be very clear about what you're wanting people to comment on. And then you have some period of time where you're like, now I'm gonna like synthesize what I'm hearing and what I plan to do next. And you may even want to create something like a Loom video that walks people through stuff. So if I were to do it, I'd probably have some combo of a memo, some video, and I'd use like time periods very clearly. Like, hey, on Tuesday, I'm asking for your feedback to all be in. Wednesday, I'm going to synthesize it. And by Wednesday night or Thursday morning, I'm going to send out next steps. Because what you miss in the asynchronous is like any kind of forcing function or like urgency. I don't know. It could just go on forever, which is definitely not what you want.
Cool. Next question. It sounds like the product review is focused on the goal of aligning teams on requirements pre-kickoff. Looking forward, I'd love to get an idea about how project kickoffs should go and how to keep marketing customer success and supporting the loop leading up to the launch. Finally, before a product launch, is there a separate product review?
So I look at product reviews as there's probably a few pivotal moments when they happen. Before a project kicks off, you're trying to get a bunch of feedback to shape it. After you have some results, like these would probably be the two main choke points, right? Or after you've launched it, you have some results, and you're trying to decide what to do next. Those are kind of like two big pivotal moments to have a product review because there's an ability to influence what you're planning to do. And I think that's really important. As for the project management pieces, there's like 1,000 different ways to keep people aware and informed. I think the product review can be a part of that. So it can be important to have your cross-functional partners be a part of the process of figuring out what it is that needs to be done, because what's often overrated is that during the execution pieces, there's like 1,000 decisions that need to get made that are beyond what you thought of when you wrote up the original doc. So it's important to stay in the details, and it's important for the team that's going to be driving a lot of that execution in details to have the context about why we're choosing what we're choosing to do, because they're going to have to be making a bunch of little micro decisions.
The next question is from Anonymous. They work in product at Meta and say that there are typically 20 to 30 people in their product reviews, but they're usually unproductive and oftentimes looking for leadership to decide. They love your framing of how to conduct product reviews, but ask, how do you suggest presenting this to the org so things can change?
Anonymous, I feel your pain. That sounds tricky to have 20 to 30 people, and then everyone needs to weigh in, and you're not clear who the decision maker is. I did spend 3 months at Facebook and had to go through the Zuck review process, and I did not think it was amazing. Let's see. So a bunch of different strategies you might try. One is, are there any leaders that are more sympathetic to this point of view? If so, can you start to like use this method for a portion of your, product initiatives? So you're not saying let's like fully replace it. You're like, let's try this out on a portion of it. So you like lower the bar for someone to say they're willing to adopt this method. And then as you show success, then you kind of roll it out more. So it's kind of like the same as like you're starting small, and then as you see this working, and as you get more people on board, then you roll it out at a greater rate. Because I think you need some evidence. You need to like show, hey, the way we're doing it now is slow and doesn't get to the right customer problems fast enough. So let's like fix that. And here's a way to fix that. We need to be faster and get to the right customer problems more quickly. And maybe that's what I would focus on, is like, what's the problems you're trying to solve with your current method, and how can you use this as a pilot to solve those things? So focus on like, what problem is this solving? Try to align people around the problem, right? Instead of like, hey, we've got a solution. Here's a new solution. Say, we've got a problem. Here's what it is. Does everyone agree? Great. Everyone's agreed on the problem. I've got a thing I want to pilot that solves that problem, and here it is.
Awesome. Probably have time for 2 more questions. So next one is, how do you decide what requires a product review and what doesn't?
At some level, it's like, not like, what's the problem if you have too many product reviews? Yeah, one, you wasted some people's time. So maybe in the beginning, you want to err on more frequent. And then as you start to gain an instinct on what things are actually useful, then you can pare it down. Now, in general, what I'd be looking for is initiatives where you think there's going to be some disagreement. If everyone already agrees, and like, it's not, you can probably do that async. Just like send it around. Here's the doc. This is what we're doing. Great. Put your comments in there if you have any. Otherwise, we're good to go. So what you're really trying to do is, either you're still trying to form a direction and you've got a few different possibilities and there might be multiple points of view, or you've picked a direction and there might be multiple points of view of whether that's right, or you've got data. So I'd look at it where you have an opinion and there might be multiple other opinions that are valid, and you're trying to get good perspective on which one it is to go after. Those are the things that are probably right for this.
Awesome. Last question comes from Mike. Can you share thoughts on what role marketing partners can or should play in product reviews where marketing involvement is critical to a project's success?
These probably need a better name to some extent, because I think it would be perfectly fine for marketing to run a review. And I think there are times when there's like the same framework could apply to like anyone leading a project of significance. So it probably needs a broader name, because I think marketing could be the leader in some of these, and these meetings would be useful for some of their projects. Now, where they lend a role, if they're part of the team, then I'd say you're part of trying to clarify, ask the right questions. If you're a cross-functional partner, then you're in the arena, you're debating. Go in there and state your opinion. If you agree strongly with the hypothesis that the team's putting forward, say that, say why. If you disagree strongly with it, say that, say why. And I think marketing can bring a really unique voice often, because they tend to be close with the customer. And I think it's really important for these to be grounded in the customers. So where marketing could really play some balance here is products off optimizing business metrics and lost sight of why this matters to the customer, and marketing can bring that perspective back in.
Awesome. That's all the time we have for today. Tom, do you want to do a quick sign off and then we'll end the meeting?
Yeah. Hey, this was amazing. Thank you for the engagement. I'm humbled by how many people are out here wanting to learn about this topic. I think this is an important topic, and clearly there's a lot of interest in it. So thank you for your enthusiasm for this topic. And thank you for the awesome questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to everyone's questions. Hit me up on LinkedIn or just come into the artifacts and leave some comments there, and happy to go deeper into the discussion on that. But this was really fun. Really appreciate all of you. Thank you.